This is MSG Mic'd Up, a podcast from the 87th Mission Support Group, where we talk with people across JBMDL to hear the amazing things happening at the Joint Base every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of MSG Mic'd Up. Welcome back from the holidays. I hope you all had some time with your family and friends. This is Lieutenant Colonel Axel Clark, one of your hosts, and today I have with me a new host, Tech Sergeant Mariah Dixon from the Force Support Squadron. Welcome, Mariah.
Thank you.
And so today we're going to talk to the 87th Air Base Wing Historian, Mr. James Warwick. So, James, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me. This is my first podcast, so this should be interesting.
Very interesting. So let's get right into it. What does a wing historian actually do?
So not many people realize there's a wing historian. And I didn't actually know there was a historian in the Air Force until probably around 2000. With an interest in history, I decided from being in security forces to do something different. So that's how I got here. But my job really is to institutionalize all the great things that the men and women of the 87th Air Base Wing do. So I collect, I organize a ton of supporting documents. So if there's something, for example, the innovation, lab Spark lab event that we did last year. So I gathered all those documents to kind of tell the story of everything that was done to make that so successful. And then I institutionalized that in a history report. So, this last history report that's just closed off was for 2018 and 2019. And so I compile everything with all the supporting documents and just say, here's what we did. And then if you want more information, here's the supporting document. You can go, read to get more information or get the statistical data from that. I'm responsible for all of the heritage programs as far as the 87th Air Base Wing is concerned. We're a unique installation here that we have more than one historian. So there's a historian for the 305th. There's a historian for the Expeditionary Center. There's a historian for the 621st. So we're the only installation that has multiple historians like that. But as far as the 87th Air Base Wing and the Joint Base is concerned, I'm the guy. And it's kind of unique that although I'm the Air Force historian, I get a lot of questions asked about the Army and the Navy as well. So I'm kind of looked at as the Joint Base historian, kind of unofficially as well.
Got it. So you sent us the Heritage Guide, which is one of the products that you maintain, and it contains the Joint Base history across all three of the McGuire, Dix, and Lakehurst. So can you give us a couple of highlights from the Heritage Guide?
Yeah, of course. So we'll start with McGuire Air Force Base actually used to be part of the Fort Dix Army airfield. Fort Dix is actually one of the oldest parts of the whole Joint Base itself. July 1917, some New Jersey engineers came to the area, a little sleepy town called Wrightstown, and started building it up. That was in July. By December, they had already trained 22,000 troops to go to fight in Europe in World War I. So that built up pretty quick in the early 1900s. McGuire kind of broke off that in 1947 when we became a separate service. The Air Force was looking for someplace that was already pretty well established. Initially for bomber aircraft, so we had B-29 bombers here, but the tarmac was too soft. The airplanes were too heavy for it. So it ended up becoming a air defense base, so fighters were here. And then Lakehurst, technically Lakehurst is the oldest part of the installation because it was part of the Eddystone Proving Grounds where the Eddystone Corporation was testing and manufacturing artillery shells for the Russian Imperial Army. World War I kicks off, and then the Army takes over what is known as Lakehurst, and they called it Camp Kendrick. So then Camp Kendrick, only around for a couple of years for the Army Chemical Warfare Service to test chemical weapons as well as the protective equipment to protect from chemical weapons. And then in 1921, Lakehurst becomes Naval Air Station Lakehurst for lighter than air aircraft. So it's kind of the quick 30,000 foot overview, if you will, but pretty unique installation here that we have.
Mm-hmm. What's the most challenging aspect of your duties?
So the most challenging aspect is trying to gather all of the information and make sure that I have everything I need to tell the story and to archive what we do here in the 87th Air Base Wing. So it's It's very different, or it's very difficult when I have to reach this person and maybe get some of these documents. For instance, the storm we had in July of last year that ripped through here and did a lot of damage. I had to work with CE to get their documentation as far as how much the damage cost and any pictures they took when they did surveys, and then working with finance to figure out how that was going to be paid for, and then the command post to get the command post logs. So I can kind of tell that whole story. And the same thing with weather. So weather was able to provide me with some of the snapshots to show that storm system coming through. So it's collecting all this data from different sources to be able to compile and be able to tell that story and tell it accurately, right? I say story, but it's not really a story because I'm not making anything up. My job is just to report it. Mm-hmm. So there's no, it's not subjective. I don't, say, hey, I think we should have done this or we should have done that. I just say, here's what we did from A to Z, and here's the supporting documents to back that up. So there's no creative writing when it comes to a history report, which a lot of times folks are like, well, you can just write whatever and make the Air Force look good. Well, I could, but then I, wouldn't be doing my job properly. So,
what's your favorite historical fact about our now Joint Base MDL?
And my family's Air Force, so they might get a little mad at me, but I think some of the Navy history here is probably the most interesting, especially with regards to the lighter-than-air era that started with Hangar 1. Hangar 1 is 100 years old, literally 100 years old. And the lighter-than-air era was, at the time, that was the state-of-the-art, technology. And so we were putting airships flying around, escorting cargo ships across the ocean. We were developing new technologies with lighter than air, and that was the state of the art thing at the time. And so that for me is the most interesting because that whole era is gone and forgotten. But there are still plenty of pictures. There's still plenty of stories and things. The USS Macon, which went down off the coast of California, was lost for 60 years. It was stationed here at Lakehurst. It was just doing exercises out in California in the 1930s. A storm ripped off one of its fins, its tail fins, and it crashed into the ocean. Only 2 people perished in that of the 83 on board. But it was lost for 60 years and wasn't found until the late 1990s that a survey team from National Geographic and Monterey Bay Aquarium found the site, and it was still intact. So it's pretty interesting. That for me is the most interesting part.
That's very interesting.
And that includes the Hindenburg.
That does include the Hindenburg.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
So the Hindenburg, yeah. So the Hindenburg, on that May 6th event, when it crashed, that was actually, a lot of folks don't realize, that was the first voyage of its second year of doing trips here from Germany. It did I believe 12 or 13 round trips the year before, and it gives Lakehurst kind of the unique distinction of technically being the first international airport in the United States, because small planes would fly in. The Hindenburg would come in, passengers would get off, they would get on the planes and then fly to different parts of the country. So, that is pretty interesting in itself, is that a lot of folks don't realize that it made multiple trips the year before, and it would just, poor timing, bad decision making, whatever you want to call it. That disaster happened on its first trip of that year, and there were 12 or 13 more trips that were planned that year that obviously never happened. So.
Now, Mariah, you said that you have a little bit of history at Dick's that you learned while you're prepping for the podcast.
Yes. So I was in preparation for this podcast. I am what I would consider a history buff, so I was looking forward to it. And so I reached out to my mom and I was telling her about it and found out that she actually went to basic training here at Fort Dix well before I was born. But yeah, so it's kind of like a full circle story.
That's very cool, because basic training, and I think you were saying it was in the late 80s. So 87, 88 timeframe when the Base Realignment and Closure Commission decided to change the roles of Fort Dix. That's when the basic training went away. Basic training started in 1947. The first class, I believe, graduated in October of 1947. So there's 40 years-ish of basic training that happened there. And talking from you, it sounds like your mom was probably one of the last ones to go through basic training. So that's pretty historic. That's pretty cool.
Yes, indeed.
All right, James. Well, thanks very much for your time. For the folks out there, what are some resources, or where can they find more information about the history and heritage of JBMDL?
Well, you can contact me, obviously. My email is james.warrick.2. That's WARRICK .2 @us.af.mil. That's, I get a lot of emails, a lot of inquiries. So that's probably one of my favorite things to do is answer all these questions, because I get questions that come out of left field as far as, hey, my grandfather was here, or there's this unit here, or this incident happened. Can you tell me more about it? So I get a lot of inquiries through email that way. You can contact me at my phone, 754-3350. On SharePoint, if you have access to the 87th Air Base Wing SharePoint, under the wing staff is a historian page. I keep that updated, so it has history reports, and it has the heritage guide that we talked about. So you can go there for some resources. I've got about 110 pictures that also scroll through that you can kind of see the evolution of the base, all three parts of the base, not just the Air Force, but Fort Dix and Lakehurst as well. So,
all right. Well, great. Welcome again, Mariah. Welcome to MSG Mic'd Up. You did a great job hosting the podcast. We're excited to have you on some more episodes. And again, James, thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for having us on. This is it was really cool to read the Heritage Guide. So we'll put a link in the show notes if we can to the Heritage Guide. And then, so all the listeners out there, there's a lot of great heritage across the entire Joint Base. And like you said, it's been around a long time, and there's a lot of different missions that have been here and things that have happened here. So check it out and learn a little more about the history and heritage of JBMDL.
Definitely. Thank you.